My plan for this morning is really just to say a few things that kind of build on what Dr. Shetler said with respect to pesticides and their regulation and pesticides in food. And I don't want to take a long time to present to you because I would like rather that our discussion is driven by the questions and comments that you have, because we don't have a lot of time, and I don't want to just talk at you. I want to engage with you and hear some of your questions and see if I can point you towards some solutions or towards some information. So as I was thinking about this presentation today, I was reminded of the fact that 50 years ago this year, Rachel Carson published Silent Spring. And those of you who are old enough to remember or who have studied these problems know that Silent Spring was really a powerful expose of pesticide use. And at that time, throughout the 50s, pesticide use increased dramatically. It was used not only in agriculture, but in communities, and there's classic examples of kids running behind DDT trucks in their neighborhoods and getting sprayed and so on. And Carson, for the first time, really pulled together a huge body of scientific knowledge and also a number of areas showing scientific uncertainty, and really exposed pesticide issues to the American public. Silent Spring was serialized in The New Yorker in 3 installments. The Velsicol Corporation tried to keep the book from being published and threatened the publisher, Houghton Mifflin, with lawsuits if they went ahead with it. I'm sure Houghton Mifflin is happy that they did go ahead with it. They had strong scientific review of the book, and of course it's sold millions and been in many languages now. So 50 years ago, Carson was subsequently vindicated for everything she wrote about pesticides. But what the power of Rachel Carson was that she translated scientific evidence into a language that average person could understand and engage with and be moved by. And because of Carson's work, though she didn't live to see it, she herself was battling cancer at the time that she wrote Silent Spring, and people didn't know this at the time because she didn't want people to try to use that against her. But she was battling cancer and died soon after, about a year or so after publication. But it launched the modern environmental movement, and then by 1970 we had the creation of the Environmental Protection Agency. By 1972, DDT was banned in the United States, and the federal pesticide law that had existed since 1947 was massively reformed in 1972 as a result of Carson's work. Prior to 72, pesticides were just tested to see whether or not they did what the manufacturer claimed they would do. They were like a truth in labeling law for the purchaser of the product, a product reliability law, really. And so that if you were a farmer or someone, you'd want to know that that product actually performed the function that the manufacturer said it did. Well, in 1972, there were major changes to the law that required that the Environmental Protection Agency review the pesticides on the market for chronic toxicity as well as environmental concerns. And citizens concerned about pesticide use often hear that pesticides don't cause a problem, that if they did, the government wouldn't allow these things on the market. And industry truly spends millions of dollars to complete tests to meet the obligations of the 1972 amendments to the federal pesticide law and then subsequent amendments. However, pesticide registration is not a guarantee of safety, even with the changes we have seen. The EPA regulations specifically prohibit manufacturers from claiming that their products are safe, and this has been litigated. So, and it's illegal for manufacturers to claim safety because that is not what the registration system is actually about. The registration system is based on cost-benefit analysis, and pesticides have to be registered if they, and this is the quote from the law, says that if they have to be registered and allowed on the market unless there is an unreasonable risk to man or the environment. And so then how do you determine unreasonable risk? And they actually say man, because most tests and studies are thought about in terms of what happens to young men who are healthy. It's only recently we've begun to think about the effects on children. And that has been built into the law since then, and I'll get to that in a minute. But in other words, pesticides have to be marketed if, unless the risks outweigh the benefits. Well, it's much harder to quantify the risks than it is. It's harder to quantify the risk than it is the benefits. Benefits tend to be economic benefits, agronomic, and so on. Whereas the risks are often unknown, right? What are the risks, and how should we determine? How much importance should we determine on one person getting cancer out of 100,000 or 1 million? And each individual pesticide is regulated separately. So I had to laugh when Dr. Shetler made the comment that the National Academy of Sciences is recognizing that scientific risk assessment needs to address the cumulative impact of these things. And they just did this report a couple of years ago. Well, people have recognized for decades that we need to look at the cumulative impact of our exposures. I'm going to back up just a sec here and realize that, let me be clear about what the term pesticide refers to. It's an umbrella term that includes a wide variety of chemical and biological agents that are designed to kill, damage, or repel living organisms. So, it includes biocides that are used in this hospital, no doubt. And herbicides. So herbicides that are designed to kill weeds, fungicides kill fungi, molluscicides kill mollusks, and my personal favorite is slimicides. It's particularly useful in the political context. No, I'm just kidding. But there's all sorts of sides, essentially, that are designed to address unwanted organisms. And typically, we see about 1.2 billion pounds of pesticide active ingredient applied in the United States every year. And it's not just in agriculture, although I want to quickly focus on that, but and on two particular pesticides. But pesticides are also used, as I said, in places like hospitals, on school grounds, in school buildings, in parks, on roadsides, on people's lawns and in their homes. We're exposed to them in a wide variety of settings. And we're exposed to a wide variety of chemicals. And there are 800 pesticide active ingredients that are formulated into about 20,000 products. Yeah.
I'm with you here, okay?
Go for it.
I hear all of the millions and billions of pounds and all that, and it's hard for me to grasp. It's more like, okay, if I go to eat an apple, can you tell me what's on that apple?
Well,
or something real that I can tangibly understand pesticide in the reality of my life?
Thanks for asking that question. Because there's obviously, right, there's the way, what do we as individuals want to do? Choices do we want to make about our families? And then there are larger questions about the policies. And I just discovered that my friends at the Pesticide Action Network have recently put together a very handy tool. In fact, apparently it has I don't have one of these fancy cell phones, but you can download an app. And if you go to, it's at the very bottom of this first page on the blue sheet, whatsonmyfood.org, and it's got a searchable database, so you can put in there, any food product you're interested in. I don't think it has processed foods, but it'd be like asparagus or whatever, vegetables and fruits, and it will link the information that we have about pesticide residue data on foods, right? Because we sample foods for pesticide residues, and so you can find out, well, which ones tend to be found on apples, and then link to various toxicology information. It's a pretty neat tool. And they recently updated it with information on honeybee toxins, because many honeybees are threatened by pesticide use. Right. And so you can figure out, well, what do you, what can you make some food choices based on protecting the honeybee? Does that help?
Yeah, but if I could add to that,
sure,
I mean,
please.
I think the policy issues are huge, but I don't think we get any movement on the policy issues without getting it down to real.
Mm-hmm.
So that, like, if I try to tell my mother, it hasn't killed me yet, but if I say, Mom, when you take a bite of that apple, this happens, write to your congressman. And I guess,
hear ya.
just like yesterday's talks where we talked about, we need the stories that get to the values that motivates people more than the facts. So I want to know the facts, but I want to make it real so that when I can talk about this, suddenly people can go, oh, this really does impact me and my community in a real way.
I think that's true for kids too.
Oh,
when you're
absolutely.
Communicating this stuff to kids.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's actually what I want to spend a little time talking about,
Some
kids.
tangible stuff.
In Sonoma County, they had a pesticide watch group
Where?
In Sonoma County.
Sonoma.
It's Northern California, where a lot of the apples from Northern California come, and wines, those kind of things. But one of the things they actually did was give warnings on the days that they were spraying specific chemicals on specific orchards or specific vineyards in the area. And one of the things they found is most of the schools were all in those areas. So every time those pesticides went out in that area, then because of the drift, you could actually see how much your kids locally were actually being exposed to and what specific chemicals. That's actually my question. Is there something like that in this area? Because you guys get big inversion layers and pretty much everything stays here for a while because of those inversion layers in terms of what people are doing locally, climately or with certain crops or the things around here in terms of even affecting you here in Missoula.
Sure.
Or even Spokane. I don't know what they're doing in Spokane, and I live in Spokane now.
Well, our inversions tend to be during the winter. So there isn't a lot of spraying happening at that time. And in this area, we do have some fruit industry still, not a lot, but some that will spray. But I don't know of anything like that here as far as alerting people to spraying, other than, there are a few policies here locally about posting on lawns and like on campus. But we don't have a very strong right to know provision here.
So even when they're spraying the schools, that sort of stuff with your kids, because most schools actually spray their buildings and their lawns and use herbicides.
I'm not sure how the schools here manage it, but it's a really good question. Maybe somebody else knows.
I'm not sure the other website, there is a website too that says, okay, if you're gonna buy organic, these are the things you need to do, because these are the ones that are absorbed the most in.
Yeah, and this
dirt and
website that I
one
mentioned
says it.
does have a comparison between
Right.
conventional and organic foods. And somebody mentioned children, and I think that's, you know, a huge motivator for a lot of people to get involved in these issues. And in fact, in the late 80s, some of you may remember the ALAR issue, where ALAR was a growth regulator sprayed on apples in order to keep them from falling until they could be harvested. And it was a probable carcinogen, and EPA knew it, and it was sprayed a lot on apples. And kids eat a lot of apples. They drink apple juice, you know, ideally. And as a result, there was a big story on 60 Minutes, and as a result, there were people like stopped buying apples for their kids and stuff. And the organic sales skyrocketed, and we've seen organic sales increase every year, almost 20% a year since the early 90s, since that ALAR incident. And, you know, I might even remember Meryl Streep formed Mothers and Others, and, you know, because parents really care about this. Well, since that time, we've learned a lot more about how kids are differentially affected by things like pesticides. And Dr. Shetler referred to that in his talk, you know. They're more vulnerable in many ways because pound for pound, they eat more food, they breathe more air, and they drink more water than adults do. And so therefore they tend to absorb higher concentrations of these pesticides. And then, you know, they also crawl around on the floor, put things in their mouths and so on, and that can increase their exposure. So in the
Study also showed that they're born with it in their cord blood as
Yeah.
well. So with 250 chemicals already in your mama's womb,
Yeah.
and you're born already with it, you know, what's the evolutionary effect over the course of time?
right, and the developmental effects, and there's a lot of, you know, concern about certain classes of pesticides, including the organophosphates, which were nerve toxins developed during the Second World War. And this is the one chemical I want to spend just a minute talking about, because, well, there's actually, it's a class of chemicals, the organophosphates, and in the mid-1960s, 1990s, excuse me, 1996, the federal government changed the federal pesticide law to try to protect children. And what they said was, instead of only looking at one particular chemical, we should look at the chemicals that have a common mode of toxicity. So for instance, all the organophosphates are nerve toxins. They were designed as nerve gases for the war. Well, they have the same effect on an insect's nervous system as they do on a human's. And especially these insecticides are used widely on fruit crops, which, as I mentioned, you know, a lot of kids, you know, eat a lot of applesauce and, you know, other types of fruits and fruit drinks, especially in greater proportions given their weight. So the Food Quality Protection Act in 1996 required that EPA look at these common modes of toxicity so that you wouldn't just be looking at what would be the impact of chlorpyrifos all on its own, right, which is one of the organophosphates, but all of the organophosphates and how kids might be exposed to them. And not just at what's on food, but how they are exposed through multiple routes of exposure. So in addition to food, but what's sprayed in the home and so on. Well, one of these neurotoxins is called chlorpyrifos. And in 2001, in order to meet the requirements of this new law, EPA banned most home uses of chlorpyrifos. And so you really shouldn't see it used in homes, but it's still used in agriculture. I mean, that's kind of the way they dealt with this, was to limit what it could be used on. But it's still widely used in agriculture. In fact, it's one of the leading chemicals used in agriculture today still. It's known to lower IQ by several points. And it's also known to increase the risk of ADHD, right? Because these are nerve toxins, right? You can just imagine sort of how it might act on a child. Well, I found this morning. I didn't know this, but there was a study done recently that showed 93% of Americans have metabolites, which are the breakdown products. They have metabolites of chlorpyrifos in their urine. Well, actually, I should say we do, right? Chances are almost all of us in this room have some of this in our bodies. Children of farm workers and farm worker communities or farming communities have an increased risk. So, one of the things is that we need to do is to strengthen enforcement and implementation of this new law, because it actually has the potential to really protect kids. Like if we protect the most vulnerable people in society, kids, farm workers, then we protect everybody. And so I wanted to mention this as an important piece for folks to look at. And then I'm just going to stop and I'm going to make one last comment at another, because we were talking about organic foods. There a University of Washington study showed that children who are fed predominantly organic produce have a sixth the level of the pesticide byproducts in their urine than those kids who are fed non-organic foods. So, organic is not completely pesticide-free. There are certain ones that are allowed, but by and large, it eliminates toxic pesticides and synthetic fertilizers. And I would say it's still a really important thing for all of us to support, in addition to supporting local food that, where you might know what the practices are, but somebody might not be certified organic. So.
When you're talking about this toxicity level within a human being, especially a child, then you also have to look at the fact that the nutritional aspects of foods, because soil has been depleted, in a study that was shown that a bowl of spinach from 1953, you need to eat the equivalent of 42 bowls of spinach to get the same nutritional level. So while those kids are consuming organic food, they're still not consuming nutritionally high levels. And so do they become more susceptible to these inorganic substances like all the pesticides because their bodies still aren't getting proper nutrition? So how does that affect our immune system?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I don't know. I'm not a specialist in that area at all. My focus really is on agriculture and food systems, and how do we move this super tanker around? I mean, I think your question is a great one. Like how do I get my mom dialed into this?
Or my kids.
Or your kids, yeah. Yeah.
This addresses that a little bit. There are actually kits now where you can test yourself. And there's a big question on whether you should challenge to actually force pesticides or mercury or things out of your blood system, that you can do them in hair, blood, or urine. Theoretically, urine is more of what you're really exposed to immediately, more water soluble, whereas blood is what you're carrying around for a while. There's a lot of controversy about hair because there's so much junk in shampoos, and essentially it's a record of that process. But they've even gone back as far and looked at stress in previous generations and how it actually affects this generation in terms of growth and obesity and those kind of things. And they're actually finding genetically that it switches on certain genes and actually makes diabetes be a higher prevalence or obesity be a higher prevalence, or having other processes go on. But it is available that if you wanted to really know, what am I carrying around, or you're just getting ready to have a baby or thinking about, working on having a baby, wanting to check those things. The dentist industry also doesn't like to talk much about all the stuff they used to put in teeth, but old caries and/or cavities that have been filled all had mercury in them. And to be honest, some of the biggest issues were with the dentists themselves, who were exposed to those metals all the time, and so they've gone more to non-biologically interactive fillings and those kind of things. But if you have all that stuff still in your body, you're still secreting it out into your body, and it's affecting you in a lot of different ways. So you can actually test it. To be honest, you have to ask your doctor. There's medical kits that are usually done by integrative practitioners. If you check, I don't know who's an orthomolecular doc here in Missoula, but
Georgia might know.
yeah, that'd be a good one to find out. But I know where I'm from, there's a huge group of physicians that are kind of the nerds of medicine, but they know all those metabolic pathways and really look at how they're affected by processes, both nutritional pathways and mineral pathways, as well as pesticide pathways and those kind of things. And so you can actually check.
The Food Matters movement, the orthomolecular movement is behind that Food Matters movement.
Right, and there actually is it's an international organization, so you can actually go online and find if there's anybody here local that does that kind of thing. And they did everything from the initial study in prisons in Chicago and how it affect behavior and violence, and changing the dietary processes in prisons to actually back off the use of force and meds to suppress prisoners. So,
Are there other comments, questions?
Actually, yeah, this is a different topic, but I wanted to make a pitch for the Missoula Community Food Cooperative. This is it's a membership-owned nonprofit store, grocery store. It sells local food, local and mostly organic food, and it's relative to, say, the Good Food Store. It's more local. It's much cheaper, and it's nonprofit. It's sort of outside the system. I mean, it's a cooperative of Missoula people. It's located at the north end of Burn Street, off Broadway, near Russell, and you can shop there three times before you need to join. So you can shop there anytime. It is membership. There is a membership fee, which is sliding scale. And the tough part is as the rules currently stand, you are required to do 3 hours of volunteer work a month, because that's the staffing. That's who's checking your groceries and loading the shelves. But it's a really great organization that really needs support, and it's local, it's affordable, and it's organic.
And it's a beautiful space. I just took my students there last week on a little field trip. So it's a really nice space, and they got a little bistro going. Yeah.
I just have a question about pesticides and reporting. I know a lot of the problem has been establishing like cause versus correlation and how that all works in the legal system. But is there a way where an average person can connect with data or, like instances or coincidences that we think are worth investigating? Is there somebody who's sort of compiling all that, or how can you contribute to that sort of database in a scientific way?
So you mean, like if you suspect that there's been some exposure and some health outcome, who would you report it
like
to?
All of a sudden you start seeing, as a nurse, like start seeing a few more children coming in with these sorts of symptoms, and oh, interesting, they all live near Roundup exposure.
Right.
Like, who do I tell that to? I mean, obviously, I'm sure the FDA is like flooded with things like that. Is there a nonprofit that's kind of teasing that?
Yeah,
sort of
an
part?
excellent organization. Well, there's a couple of excellent pesticide reform organizations, and I've included their names on this blue sheet. But one is the Northwest Center for Alternatives to Pesticides, which is based in Eugene, Oregon, but covers the whole northwestern region. And they can often actually help you dig up specific information that might help you track this down. I mean, one of the challenge, it's the Northwest Center for Alternatives to Pesticides, and their website is pesticide.org. And so they will even do specific searches for you to help you try to uncover this. And it kind of it depends a little bit on the state you're in and what type of exposure you think might have occurred. Was it occupational versus from some other kind of use of pesticide, or what's on the food. I mean, that's part of the problem, is there's a lot of fragmentation, right? So FDA regulates pesticide residues on food, but EPA, Environmental Protection Agency, regulates pesticides on the market in general and their allowed uses, because with pesticides, because they're a product, the way they regulate it is that there's specific uses you can do, and they're on the label. So if the pesticide industry will often say the label is the law. So if you want to find out where it was applied, what might have been applied, but of course one of the challenges we're dealing with is, and one of the reasons why it's not easy to put some poster child story up there, is that there's so many things that people are exposed to. Actually teasing out that, as you said, is really challenging. So in the state of Montana, the Montana Department of Agriculture regulates pesticide use on behalf of the federal government. And then I think the Department of Labor does the occupational exposure. So it kind of depends. But NCAP out of Eugene could help you a lot. And also the Pesticide Action Network North America is based out of San Francisco, and they're the ones that are doing this What's on My Food website, but they have a great email list if you want to get on it too. They just they monitor a wide variety of things, and they often will help people with questions like that. Okay. And Women's Voices for the Earth here in Missoula, they're not working as much on pesticides right now, but they are working on a variety of chemical issues that affect all of us, so they're a good local resource too.
How persistent
Go ahead.
How persistent are pesticides once a use is discontinued? Like you mentioned some dates, like 1996. Well, obviously 72 is a long time ago. Right. But would that still be found in the soil? Is there uptake?
Absolutely. I mean, probably all of us in this room have DDT in our bodies, and it's been banned since 1972. And so even when a chemical is taken off the market, which is very, very rare, they often will allow it to continue to be used until the company's stockpiles are used up. But the persistence of a chemical in the environment really depends on the chemical itself. Some of them, we're more concerned about the metabolites, the breakdown products, than we are actually the parent compound. Others, it's not the case. One pesticide that I've been particularly concerned about is atrazine, which is one of the top 2 chemicals used in the United States in agriculture, and it's an herbicide. And it's been banned in Europe because of its link to breast cancer. There's some debate between EPA and the International Association that does research on cancer, which sees atrazine as a carcinogen, but the EPA is not accepting that. But atrazine loves water, and atrazine is found in water throughout the United States and actually throughout the world. I mean, it's in the Arctic ice, right? They're not really using a lot of atrazine up in the Arctic. In fact, none, right? Most of it's used on corn. But we use 76 million pounds here a year. There was recently a study done of drinking water in 2008. 94% of the drinking water that the EPA tested had atrazine in it. It loves water. And
Is
it,
it airborne or goes into the aquifer?
well,
Spring?
it'll be, when they'll spray it, it goes into, into the whatever water's nearby, it'll run off. And then it'll evaporate and volatilize, and then when it comes down again, it'll settle in water again. So that's how it kind of moves through the system. And it's known to disrupt the hormone system, delay puberty. It's associated with low birth weight babies in Iowa, on and on. It's a real chemical of concern. Although one of the, kind of going back to your point is, pesticide reform activists had to make a very strategic decision early on, like, do they fight chemical by chemical, or do they try to reform the process? Because there's so many chemicals, and so many of them that we don't have much information on. With a few exceptions, most of the focus has been trying to reshape these laws that are basically let these chemicals be on the market until proven guilty. And that means that we have the burden of proof, which doesn't quite make sense.
For organic farming, all the pesticides that are allowed to be used for organic farming, would you consider all those that are currently on U.S. organic farming safe?
Yeah, they go through a pretty rigorous review of what materials, both for pesticides or other things, are allowed in organic systems. And it's kind of always like, if you have a pest problem, if you're an organic farmer, you have to, and you really can't handle it in some other way, there are resources available to help you evaluate which materials are allowed in the system and then what their toxicity is. But some of them, really are, a common one, for instance, is BT, Bacillus thuringiensis. It's a naturally occurring soil bacteria. It's not really a problem. And organic farmers have used it for 60 years. It's now being genetically engineered into conventional crops. And so the concern there is that we'll build resistance to it. So there's other issues going along with this. But yeah, I remain a full believer in organic systems. I think we have to defend them in a way from being weakened. And maybe is that kind of what you were thinking?
Because I'm a new organic farmer.
Oh, cool.
And we have an apple orchard, and gosh, it really is, this is something I've always wanted to do, and I'm just thrilled with it, but it's been a pickle to figure it out.
Oh, okay. Contact the Organic Materials Review Institute, OMRI, is actually the entity that will give you that information on like what's allowed, what isn't, and then the key thing is actually talking to the other growers around here who.
No, I've been learning a lot from people, but I think it's interesting too. The general public kind of assumes that
It's
organic farming is non-pesticide, and I know there's approved things out there, but I'm just curious to find out what you taught in the whole thing too.
Yeah, right. And BT is often used in organic systems, orchards.
Do you think that the problem that she's going through is essentially because Americans expect pretty food? When I was growing up, having a wormhole in an apple in the store was, not a problem. You didn't have perfect food, but now Americans expect this picture perfect food, and so the use of these pesticides extends that vision that we're supposed to have these beautiful, not a creature has touched this stuff.
And
I think
non-perishable.
And so I think we have to change the conversation of what people are accustomed to or have grown accustomed to. And at what point in time did we think that plastic apples were something to eat? They sat on your parents'
Well, we don't
table.
grow it anymore. So, when you grew it yourself, it's like, oh, okay, the snails were through here, and okay, that's why my lettuce looks this way. And
Just learn to share.
And it's
worms or whatever.
escargot if you eat it.
Well, and one of the things that I think is helpful is educating people when they buy your fruit, for instance, and saying, look, if there's a wormhole in it, that it wasn't sprayed heavily. So that's part of
This
it.
is an apple, this isn't your apple on dry.
But I guess the flip side of it, as somebody who's watched the development of the organic industry over 25 years or more, is that, people used to say, well, you can't produce as nice a food or high yielding, under organic systems as you can in conventional systems. We have to have these conventional systems in order to feed the world. Well, actually, organic systems work. And also they produce some pretty darn nice, beautiful foods. So, huh?
It tastes better.
It tastes better. Well, yeah, and I think, I guess my point is that, yes, it's changing people's expectations. Well, that's really going to be hard to do. On the other hand, we've demonstrated really clearly over these last few decades that organic systems really work. They're not a throwback to some dark age. They're not going to put us all back into the cave, which is literally what people, charged organic farmers with, in the late 70s, early 80s when it was starting to catch on. So I think that's exciting. And I guess, it used to be that you couldn't hold your head up in rural communities unless you were a conventional farmer. If you said you were organic, you were like laughed out of the room. But you know what? There are a lot of the organic farmers in Montana are surviving and doing well. Montana has a lot of organic acreage. We'll probably have to wrap up.
From the concept of the Occupy movement and doing something about it in action, the EPA, I know it does a lot of really great things, but how do you think we can make it more responsible for the job it's supposedly doing when they're letting through a whole lot of stuff that really should have been or can be warned about in the midst of that process? And it seems like they're very sensitized to commercial interests and money versus us.
Absolutely. I mean, these are products that are sold. So they have a constituency behind them that is literally invested in maintaining their ability to put them on the market, right? So the chemical industry has lobbyists in there working with EPA and in Congress and all the time. What I think we can do, in addition to supporting local farmers and supporting organic farmers, is to support organizations like NCAP and like the Pesticide Action Network so that they can represent our interests in these halls of power, if you will, because that kind of policy reform is essential. It's not sexy. It's a lot easier on the 10 tips to say, hey, buy organic food, and it makes it all about what we as consumers buy or don't buy. But I'm going to leave you with this one last point, since I know we're out of time, which is Sandra Steingraber was here a couple of years ago, and somebody asked her some questions at the end about, well, what can I buy, that will change this? And she said, when we were trying to end slavery in this country, we didn't say we can end slavery just by not buying one. And I thought, oh my, yeah, that is just like such a powerful statement, right? Because we're not just consumers. We need to be citizens as well and engage in this great mess that we call democracy. And I just want to share with you the title of this new book by Sandra Steingraber called Raising Elijah. I just read it with my graduate students, and it's really a terrific look at the threats to children, and Elijah is her son, but the threats to children from chemicals in a variety of settings, not just around food, but my graduate students didn't find it particularly cheery, but she's a beautiful writer, and actually all of her books are excellent. If you're not familiar with her work, this might be something you share with your kids, actually. You were saying how to change your kids or your mother. Her book, Having Faith, is about her experience going through pregnancy and all the things that the fetus can be exposed to in utero and what the impacts could be. But she melds this with this beautiful description of what's happening to the fetus and how it's developing and what, the biology of reproduction. She's a biologist by training. But I just wanted to kind of end there because Sandra Steingraber, I would say, is the modern day Rachel Carson, and I really mean it because she writes in a way like Carson did about these chemicals and how they affect our lives, but in a way that the average person can understand and get. So I have no conflict of interest in promoting this book other than saying it's an excellent read, and I encourage you to check it out.
We have another really interesting lecture coming up now, and then we will break for lunch, and there will be more instruction about that. Dr. Greg Muller is here from the University of Idaho, and I've had the pleasure of getting to know him a little bit because I'm his student. So I'm enrolled in a course that he's teaching. It's an online course called Principles of Sustainability. It's a phenomenal experience, which I want to tell you about so I can hand out these cards. And it ties together his years of work as an environmental chemist and toxicologist with a more recent, maybe not more recent, but long-term interest in sustainability. He has done a number of really interesting things, and you can read about that on your sheet here that describes speakers, but one of which is him holding the patents for water treatment technology, and he just was getting over jet lag the last couple days because he flew in from Korea where he was working with people there who are using them in 25 different communities or so in their wastewater treatment plants. So he's applying his knowledge in the technical sense that way. He's applying his knowledge and expertise as a teacher, a very effective teacher through this course. So really, I just started to take this course in January. We had already planned this, and I said, boy, would he be great to have here. And so he agreed, and we're really pleased to have him. Both, he gave a talk just now on plastics. He's going to talk to us now about sustainable systems thinking, and then he will chair the panel this afternoon. So we're greatly appreciative of that. Now, I want to hand these cards out. What these are is this is a card actually about this course that I'm taking, which is completely available online. So it's just a rich resource of online videos that are really beautifully done, loaded with information. So at the bottom here is a link to that website. So I'm going to actually hand these out. If you don't want one, please pass them on along, and then I'll collect them later. And at the bottom, there's a sign that says, do not throw this away, please pass it to a friend, okay? So I want everyone in the world to know about this course. I think what you should do is put it on your Facebook, send it to whoever you can, because it's this resource that's right there. It covers so many of these topics that we're talking about today in a very well-researched and well-done way. Yes?
I just told them out there that I have to make an announcement about the cards for John Tester. They're on all the tables. They need to be returned to Women's Voices with the tables. Everybody here needs to sign.
Yep. And we talked about that before we left, but did you hear that? Just a reminder about the cards for Senator Tester. They're out on the table, and this is a way to let him know to please support or thank him for supporting the Toxic Chemical Reform Act. Okay? Now, without further ado, Dr. Muller.
Thank you so very much. Thank you. Well, good morning, Missoula. That's a pretty lame response from the future leaders of our great nation. I will start that. Thank you very much. Good morning, Missoula, and thank you to my hosts for this invitation, and thank you all for being here today. We're going to be talking about some things, and Beth introduced this as a lecture. And Beth ought to know by now, one thing I don't do is lecture. Okay? I don't like PowerPoint, but I had to put some speaker notes up there because I'm still a little bit foggy and jet-lagged. But one thing I want to tell you is that for the next 45 minutes or so, no one in this room is safe. You in the back, you're not safe. You in the front, you're not safe either. I will also tell you that there is homework with this lesson. Those cards you have, we're going to speak for 45 minutes. I can't tell you everything you need to know in 45 minutes. So, your assignment is the 45 hours of documentary lectures filmed in HD with 100 cooperating filmmakers and scholars from around the world on all subjects related to sustainability. What I am going to do is try to teach you and introduce you today into the concept of practical sustainability. And what we are going to do is demystify, decode sustainability. That's a pretty ambitious goal. My general goal today is I want to communicate hope with a sense of urgency, an urgency I think we all understand. I often think in groups like this that we could take the energy and the great ideas, the innovation, the dreams, the hopes of people like you, write them all down and send them to those that hold the chains of power. We do that in an urgent way. And how do we do that? We do that, FedEx, right? Stick that in a FedEx parcel and send it to the powers that be, right? Package looks something like this. You've seen this, right? Is there a problem with this? How many people have gone to FedEx recently? You fill this out, right? You fill this out, right? You fill this out, right? They stick this thing in there, right? There's this thing on the back, right? Full of plastic, full of resources, full of materials. FedEx is listening to you. This is an anachronism. In a month, you will not see these. This will be a part of capitalist history. They are changing their packaging, a more sustainable, earth-sensitive, green packaging. The next time you go to FedEx, tell the worker there how proud you are of FedEx, a number 7 company on the sustainability index, of what they are doing to create a better planet and to create a better future for our children. So let's talk a little bit this morning about securing health, sustainable systems thinking. So what are we talking about when we talk about securing health? Well, in the healthcare community, I'm not a healthcare person, and so it's always risky business. But my definition of health has to do with a far broader definition, a definition that encompasses human health, community health, not in the public health domain, but good, socially vibrant communities, ecosystem health, and importantly, economic health. It's a state of complete well-being, and it's not merely the absence of what I like to refer to as negative indicators. And I've written at the bottom, with apologies to the World Health Organization definition in 1946 of disease being of what disease is and what health is. So let's see this. What is sustainable? I have written here not just a goal. We talk about sustainability in terms of goals, but we rarely talk about them in terms of sustainable as a characteristic. What's your name?
Shandela.
Please stand up. Your name again?
Shandela.
Shandela, what does that mean to you, that sustainability should be a characteristic?
It should be not what we do, but who we are.
Yeah. And what's the difference between a characteristic and a goal?
Say that again.
What's the difference between a characteristic and a goal?
A goal would be something you're achieving to do, and a characteristic would be who you are in doing that.
Good enough, I think. Appreciate it. In fact, when we say things about goals, and we should have goals, but sometimes goals we format and we template as things that are out there, and they're not real and tangible. Each and every one of us can sit down and essentially look at our familiar spaces, those extremely familiar spaces that, in fact, we've become immune to the detail of. I'll give you a precise example. I went on the warpath at my university because I saw someone hauling in one of those big water bottle coolers We've got water fountains, chilled water fountains, and refillable water bottle stations all over the campus. And a service was bringing the old-fashioned water cooler thing up the step. I said, what's going on with that? We have a sustainability center, we have student activism. And so I asked around. Well, we've always done that. We have? And so I went on a rampage, and I found out that it was actually the University Research Office was doing that for their people. Oh, we like that. We like the convenience. We like the hot water. That's good enough. I understand that. And I said, well, I'm on the warpath. As part of the warpath, I went to our environmental sciences department, and I was talking to the Sustainability Center people, and I said, this is really bad. It's unacceptable. And I looked, and there's a water bottle, water cooler. And I said, are you guys walking past that each and every day? You're out there installing refillable water stations all over campus, but you're walking past that each and every day. None of us is immune to that. And in fact, our greatest challenge is to examine the common and the ordinary as individuals, not waiting for those people to change, not waiting for political leaders to change, not even waiting for community leaders to change, but waiting and initiating that change in our own selves, our own intimate environments, our own personal habits. This is a key concept in sustainability. It's best thought of as something that is more sustainable or less sustainable. Well, let's think that through. It's really easy to understand things that are drastically non-sustainable. In 1989, we as humans on the planet celebrated something. It was a very cool thing if you think about it. You ever heard of the Montreal Protocol? Montreal Protocol to remove those chemicals, CFCs, chlorofluorinated hydrocarbons, the air conditioning refrigerants, remove them out of production and use. Took quite a year, quite a few years to actually cycle out, especially in developing countries. But we did it. Now, isn't that amazing? That we saw something as human society that was a clear and present danger to planetary existence, and one would argue the existence of humankind. We came together and we did something about it. That was a very cool thing. That single instance should give us great hope for the future. Great hope that we, as a community of individuals, as a community of nations, can come together and change the world for the better. Good stuff. So when we think of sustainability and sustainable, let's not think in terms of absolutes, but let's think of practices, things, services, products that are either more sustainable and those that are less sustainable. Let's transition to the more sustainable. Try not to be an absolutist. Try to be someone that encourages by, first and foremost, your own personal behaviors. How many people have ever gone to a Subway, had a sandwich? Pretty good sandwiches, it's pretty good, wholesome, green eating. And by the way, it's Doctors Incorporated that runs that shop, whoever they are. But doctors, they know what they're doing, right? Except when you check out. And like many corporations, Subway is a green corporation. They're trying to really do good things, and they think about their production practices. But they wrap in 3 layers of paper, and then what at the checkout? They put it into the plastic bag. How many of you have declined the plastic bag? Very good. What I want you to do, every time you decline a package, that useless plastic bag, in a very nice way to the clerk, because the clerk is doing their job, so be respectful. Say, no thanks, I don't need that. I'll just carry this. I'll use my hands, my pockets, the bag that I brought. But let's say it's Jane or Jim. The name tags really help. Personalize it and say, today, Jane, Jim, you and I are going to save the world. And say it loud enough that the 3 people behind you hear that. And not in a way that says, I'm kind of cool and sustainable, but just that it's common sense. I don't need this. We don't need this. This is useless. That piece of plastic has about a 5-minute lifespan. And then what do you do with it? It's really not a multiple use item. We need to be able to think about those kind of things and encourage companies in this capitalist society that we live and work in as consumers. We have incredible power in a capitalist society. The movement starts with one. Sustainable and sustainability, often value-driven, elusive, and filtered by local or regional economic security concerns. Could I have you stand up? And tell us your name.
Lydia.
Lydia, what does that mean to you? Often value-driven, elusive, and filtered by local or regional economic security concerns. Those are big words. That's what the professors like to use to kind of make ourselves look. But how do you translate that?
Answer what she said earlier.
Yes.
Often value-driven, elusive, something that just gets away from you and filtered by local and regional economic security concerns. Help.
Okay, let's take the last part. Economic security. Translate that for me.
You think because you have a lot of money, you're secure?
How about the opposite end of the spectrum? Do you think people that are in dire straits in developing countries, that are in impoverished circumstances, are going to be worried about recycling?
No, I don't think they have much to recycle.
Yeah. And just in terms of waste management and attitudes, maybe about deforestation, all of those things differ with our economic circumstances.
Yeah, I think some of those countries are just trying to survive.
Exactly.
With what they're doing.
Yeah, those people. Thank you. And so, a dean should know this. Stand up. Patricia Butterfield, Dean of Nursing School at WSU. Value-driven and elusive. What does that mean?
Well, thanks for the pressure there. Elusive floats away easily and can change, and value-driven by our hearts. And they talked last night, the most difficult journey is from our head to our heart.
Mm-hmm. And I would say, thank you, I appreciate that. I would say there's other dynamics, social-political dynamics that incorporate our values. I did an internship in Washington, D.C., so I got to run around the House of Representatives at the time. And by the way, our government is run by a bunch of 20-somethings, in case you didn't know that. That's who read and write everything that goes on in that. So in fact, what we do as professors in school in trying to change lives and change minds really does make it important. But one of these 20-somethings told me, Greg, you're not very good at politics. And I said, no, I'm not really a political kind of guy. He goes, you have no clue. And I said, no, I don't. And he goes, these people hate each other in terms of the partisan divide. And so what I'm trying to say is that those values that declare partisanship also determine how an individual views what is sustainable and what sustainability is. It's a fact of reality, and I think, and I'm speaking to the choir as I look around, and please, I don't mean to insult anybody by that, but I think when we speak to the choir, we do ourselves as practitioners of sustainable thought by discounting or dismissing those who have different values, and sometimes we miscommunicate and we miss an opportunity for sharing in what we value because of that lack of sensitivity. Sustainable systems thinking. The whole is different than its parts. This one, I think I'm going to go to the back of the room, and I am going to ask these two. Did you travel together?
Yeah.
Do you know each other? Stand up, please. Would you consider yourself friends?
Yeah.
Yeah, friends. Yeah. And your name?
Alyssa.
Alyssa?
Kathy.
Kathy, great. Kathy, I'm going to have you close your eyes, okay? And so this is a trust exercise, but you don't know me, so you can't trust me, right? So, but you know Alyssa, right? Okay, so you can trust her. And so Alyssa is standing right here, and she knows that I'm not going to do anything bad to you, right? Okay, so your eyes are closed, okay? And so you're thinking, what's he going to, close tight, close tight, close tight, close tight, close tight, okay? And I'm going to put something in front of your face, so don't freak out, okay? And I want you to take a deep breath, just breathe that all in, and tell me what you're thinking. Keep your eyes closed.
It smells like cologne or something.
Keep it on. What does that smell like?
The woods.
Thank you. You can open your eyes now. So what is this?
Pine branch.
It's a pine branch, okay? Now, if we talk about it, and you guys can sit down, thank you so very much for trusting us. If, and here, you can take the cologne with you. And if we're talking about sustainable thinking, what I just demonstrated to you that by the power of scent, we did one of the parts of a forest, of the woods. But in fact, that scent is not the whole of the woods. A tree is not the whole of a woods. The system is the whole of woods. And that system is a very complicated, interrelating group of things. And we all know and understand the ecosystem services. We understand timber and the use of wood, the water, the relationship to atmospheric quality. All of those things are a part of the system we call a forest. And so the whole is different than its parts. The relationships, connections, linkages, and integration within and among systems are key concepts for us to always be aware of. So when we deny that plastic bag at Subway, we are making a linkage, a relationship that is beyond just that simple act there. We are affecting an economic system. We are affecting the production system of plastic bags. We are affecting the amount of oil that is withdrawn for plastic packaging in the United States, which amounts to 200,000 barrels of oil per day of a non-renewable resource. That is why we, as individuals, need to inspire change primarily through individual action. Often value-driven, elusive, and filtered by regional, local, or economic security concerns. Science and technology will, in due course, solve our sustainability challenges. If I could have you stand up, please, sir. And if you could introduce yourself.
Palm Fountain.
And what do you do for a living, Palm?
Retired old man.
Oh, very good. Congratulations on that. And I hope to join you in retirement someday, but we've all been through about 2 financial crises. Tell me what that means. Science and technology will, in due course, solve our sustainability challenges.
It's the typical U.S. dream that somehow science and technology will solve everything that we do wrong. Yeah. That somehow it'll clear it all up.
Good. Thank you. I appreciate that. And that's a good, solid point of view. Now, let's go to number 2. If you could stand up there.
Absolutely.
And introduce yourself to this crowd.
I'm Georgia Milan.
And Georgia, take a look at number 2. Scientific and technological developments are responsible for the degradation of the planet.
Do you want me to explain
True or
what that
false?
means, or true or false? False.
Okay.
I mean, I think it's the people's utilization of scientific and technological developments that are responsible for the degradation of the planet. That in and of themselves, technology can be used with wisdom or not.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's people's choices, how they use them,
Getcha.
that's responsible.
You bet. And I would say it's a little bit of both. We're on a pathway. We're on a pathway of discovery. Many of the chemicals that we have used were at one time considered to be wonderful, great things. And I'll say birth control pills in the 1960s. tremendous achievement in women's health. But now we're faced with the fact that those very bioactive compounds, which come through about 70% unchanged or in metabolite forms that are still very bioactive, go into our wastewater treatment plants. And as a practitioner of wastewater, I will tell you that our theology, if you will, of wastewater treatment is get the brown out. And that's about it. So those bioactive compounds get released out into the ecosystem, into our environment, and they can come back to hurt us. And I'm speaking of us in a very holistic sort of ecosystem sense. So science and technology does create problems, but science and technology is a process. It's a process of knowledge and discovery. And it can put us in problems, it can create problems, but it can also help dig us out of the problems. It is not necessarily a cure-all, and sometimes it can actually create worse problems by trying to cure the problems of yesterday. Futurist Adam Fricker writes, "The challenge of sustainability is neither wholly technical nor rational. It is one of change in attitude and behavior. Sustainability therefore must include the social discourse, where the fundamental issues are explored collaboratively within the groups or community concerned." Go ahead and stand up. You thought that blocking that was going to keep me from getting to you. Go ahead and introduce yourself.
I'm Tracy.
Hi, Tracy. How are you? I'm
Good.
Greg. Tell me about that. Do we do that very well? Sustainability, therefore, must include the social discourse where the fundamental issues are explored collaboratively within the groups or community concerned.
I think we're trying. I don't think that we're doing as good of a job as we can do, but we're moving in that direction. I hope we move more in that direction in the future.
Good deal. Well, I'll tell you what Adam Fricker says. He says that we do not do that very well, partly because of increasing populations, complexity, distractions, and mobility, but more because of certain characteristics of the dominant paradigm that are seen as desirable. What does that mean, dominant paradigm?
I feel like we have a little bit of a dominant paradigm of ignorance in this country and anti-science, and I think that's really hurting us and keeping us from moving forward in sustainable practices.
Yeah.
I definitely agree with that.
You bet. Is our culture a culture of sustainability? No. How would you define our culture? Culture of waste, a culture of consumption. And so the dominant paradigm is not one that perhaps we need as a society, as a human society, having major impacts on the planet. And yes, they are major. No matter what the oil companies say on their commercials, it's marketing. And we are easily marketed. We have specific challenges. So what is the stuff of sustainability? When you think about the stuff of sustainability, I'm not going to call on you because you've got the answer. I'm going to call on her because she's hiding over here. Go ahead. She's celebrating women. Go ahead and stand up. And what's your name, please?
My name is Rita.
Rita, pleased to meet you. What is the stuff of sustainability?
Well, I guess I think of what are the characteristics, and one of them would be reusing it again.
Mm-hmm.
Or one of it would be, another might be what keeps it going.
Uh-huh.
And I think you could, I'm sure on the next slide you have quite a few characteristics.
Am I that predictable? Actually, I want you to think of other intangible drivers of action, of human action, like liberty and love, and how they have motivated transformation. Go ahead and stand up. Introduce yourself here.
Steve MacArthur.
Steve, pleased to meet you. I'm Greg.
Hi, Greg.
Think of other intangible drivers of human action like liberty or love. What's love? And ladies, notice that I picked a guy. Okay. So we're going to grade his response here.
Well, I think love is that feeling of kind of transcendence and
Transcendence?
and feeling whole.
Okay, feeling whole.
Yeah.
Okay.
So.
And ladies?
And excited and, you know, just.
How did he do? Is that pretty good? Pretty good? Like, give him some applause, please. Give him show him some love. Thank you. But again, these intangible drivers like liberty. Liberty. What is liberty? You hear it all the time, but what's its definition? And the same thing I would argue is about sustainability. It's one of these intangible drivers, and we need to use that to motivate a transformation. So looking and mirroring these same sort of characteristics will help people like us communicate to people that aren't like us. And many people are not like us. All of these human drivers and aspirations link our history with our present, and they do help us create a future. Sustainability is first and foremost will of the people stuff. You don't get the will of the people without solid understanding, solid community building, solid communication, an opening of hearts and minds, and valuing not your own values, but the very hard-held values of others that are in strong disagreement and fundamental discord with your core belief system. That is the challenge of sustainability. Sustainability, especially in a development context, couples economic growth, social progress, and environmental protection in the present and the future. Explain that to me. I'm not so sure I understand that university speak. Go ahead and stand up and introduce yourself.
My name is Alice Deshay.
Very pleased to meet you, Alice.
And I would say that sustainability takes everything in. Your psychological well-being, your financial well-being, the environmental well-being. It includes everything.
Good, good. You've thought about this a little bit, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah, good. You did a good job. And I would agree. I think we would all agree that there is a wholeness to sustainability, and it does couple economy. It's how we provide for the provision of goods and services, what we eat, how we do things, right? A very important concept. And it's something to not be denied in terms of the economic relationships of sustainability. Deployment requires common objectives that focus on a continuing and improving human health, community health, ecosystem health, and economic health. I'm going to ask you to stand as well, if that's okay. And if you could introduce yourself.
Sure.
Jim.
Jeff.
Jeff, pleased to meet you, Jeff. Sorry about that. Tell us what that means. Deployment requires common objectives that focus on a continuing and improvement of those health factors.
Well, I suppose it's just sort of shared objectives in terms of achieving those objectives. I think that one of the issues I'd have with sustainability overall is sort of understanding the changes that have taken place through time, and so that there's a baseline as opposed to a sort of dealing with a stable disclimax or something in this, and then trying to make it work.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that it requires a little bit more contextual analysis, perhaps, than, I mean, just shared objectives. The objectives are fine. But I think it requires a bit deeper knowledge of the issues involved.
I would agree. I'd agree. None of this stuff is easy. If it was easy, we probably would have done it by now. Establishing common objectives, that is key. And the common objectives throughout society is extraordinarily difficult. I'll give you for an example. I work a lot with agriculture. And folks that have lived on the land, lived on a family farm for 100 years, sometimes more, 5 generations, long time. In their frame of reference, their agriculture is sustainable. Have we met the requirement for common objectives? Probably not. but you understand the challenge of solid and good communication in defining what those common objectives are and why the future may not be sustainable, even if their family has been economically and agriculturally productive on that plot of land for 5 generations. This requires will of the people. This is a collaborative, continuous process. It is individual-based, but collective in its magnitude. I want to close up now with some key concepts and indicators. These is not a complete list, but I want to kind of give you a sense of where we need to go, some of the major points that we need to address. We need to transform our culture of waste. I'll give you a travel log here. I just got back about 24 hours ago, shifted too many time zones going to South Korea. A wonderful place, by the way. They live with the prospect of nuclear annihilation day in, day out. 1.5 million armed soldiers just 15 miles north of the city of Seoul. How would you like to have that as your daily existence? Now, Seoul, Korea is not known necessarily as a well, let's just say they consume a lot. They celebrate consumption, whether it's electronics, that's where your Galaxies and your Samsung TVs come from, and your Kias and Hyundais. And with the Korean-U.S. Free Trade Agreement, Seoul, Korea is now Detroit for all intents and purposes. And so it's a community that we have globalized, if you will. Wonderful people with a tremendous culture. In Seoul, 25 million people in a very small amount of space. And they did what they had to do. They grew up rather than out. And in fact, a large part of the Korean peninsula, it's up rather than out, and that has a lot to do with culture. And it's a very sustainable way to organize a city. And so you go and you see all these living towers, is what they are actually called. Now, South Korea has done something, and Seoul has done something about transforming their culture of waste. It is now illegal to put food waste in the trash. They have a separate collection system for food waste. Like they tell us, we're supposed to compost. We're not supposed to put that in the landfill, right? And many of us do that. Most of us don't, okay? In the United States, it's 4.3 pounds per day of landfill waste, right? Municipal solid waste. So in South Korea, they have a separate collection system. 3,000 tons per day in Seoul alone of food waste. And we're talking about residential food waste. They take it in, they steam clean it, it goes to a compost for agricultural fertilizer, pretty smart about that, and they take the good stuff and they produce pet food from it. Eco food. And the Koreans love their dogs. It does give us a new definition of what table scraps are, for sure. But they have done something extraordinarily unique. They've stepped it up. They are now putting RFID chips in their own personal apartment or family unit garbage cans that are set out for disposal, so that waste and garbage can be charged back in terms of waste disposal on a unit basis, on a per pound basis. Is that going to be a motivation to waste less? To recycle more? Yeah, that's a market solution. That's a very intimate level of cap and trade. I mean, when you think about that, is there going to be a motivation to increase the amount of recycling? Overall in the United States, plastics recycling is how much? Who was in the plastic seminar? 7.1%, thank you. It's very low, 7.1% of a petroleum hydrocarbon resource that's disappearing. And by the way, we hit peak oil in 2005, in case you didn't know it. It was a Nature article. It has to do with inelastic prices and a few other things. But it's going, and will be gone. So this culture of waste that we have needs to be transformed. We need to look at market solutions. We need to look at greener packaging, a partnership with our capitalist economy that does the provision of goods and services. We need to also develop a new relationship to energy and energy efficiency. We can all reduce our energy footprints by 80% here in America. That's an amazing amount. We can get 30% of where we need to be for climate change just by turning the lights out a little bit more. That's an amazing thing. That's not uncomfortable. We can get more for less just with energy efficiency. You've all heard the expression, drill, baby, drill. It's a harsh fact of nature that born today, the baby of drill, baby, drill will outlive the petroleum era. The reserve to production ratio of oil, and this is a BP statistic. BP does the most wonderful universal statistics of fossil fuels. They're in the business. 46.2 years, reserves to production ratio. So that's what we have of proved reserves. So maybe we might get 10 more years. The fact of the matter is, in terms of that Hubbert peak of peak oil, we're on the backside. If we're not there, we're almost there. 2019 is the International Energy Agency estimate of peak oil, 2019, which is a hair's breadth away. What's going to happen on the backside? Costs go up because resource goes down. 10, 20 years from now, we're going to laugh at ourselves and just shake our heads that these stupid people 30, 40, 50 years ago were throwing this stuff out. We were spending a half a gallon of gas to go get a gallon of milk. It's silliness, and that's the problem. And that's what we're not being told in the marketing about gas, natural gas, and petroleum hydrocarbons. We need to develop this new relationship to energy. We need to also identify community and enhance our communities as a local society, a local ecology, and a local solidarity for positive change. What does that mean? It means something on the other presentation that I had. I had a couple of quotes on there. What that means is that according to all good thinkers and community analysts, that community is the single most important organizational structure in our relationships. We interact with community more than we act with anything else. We can talk about national politics, but the fact of the matter is we don't really interact with national level stuff or international stuff. On a day-to-day basis, it's all about community. We need to recognize it. We need to use that as a part of growing the stuff of sustainability. Finally, I'm going to say we need to redefine capitalism to create shared value. Capitalism, we are capitalists. We need to recognize that, but we need to recognize it as the power and the strength for what it is. It is one of the most powerful forces for change. And each one of us, as a consumer, has a voice in that change. How we purchase, the decisions we make on a daily basis will impact the marketplace in a way that no power elite, that no politician can overrule. We choose, through our purchasing power, what kind of future we will have. It is a powerful statement of our ability as individuals to have not only a stake in the future, but to grab it by its throat and say, I own you. We own what we do. If we sit back and we let others make the decisions for us, we risk a negative future. I will close by telling you that sustainability, as I see it, is the greatest entrepreneurial challenge ever faced in the history of humankind. We need your innovation. We need your goodwill. We need your creativity. We need your passion. We need your understanding and your ability to sit down with people that hold values distinctly not your own and work towards the common good and a common solution. No political party, no one set of values has a monopoly on wisdom. When we share not only the present, but we share our ownership of the future. With that, I thank you for your attention and your kind attendance at a wonderful conference. I do appreciate you.
Well, thank you so much. I want to ask a quick question. We have lunch, but we also have a time for a couple questions. Do you want to do that? So go ahead if you would.
Yes.
Okay, I can't leave unchallenged the slide that seemed to be defining the components of sustainability, and one of those components was economic growth, which the word growth to me is part of the dominant paradigm that must be challenged, no matter how energy efficient, how much we cut waste, and so on and so forth. It's still a limited planet, and we can't have, there's no such thing as sustainable growth. That's an oxymoron. So I would go for changing that to economic evolution, to a more socially just and equitable and energy efficient and waste efficient economy, but not economic growth.
Yep. And the fact is that regardless of how we phrase it, the words that we choose, population is growing. And so if we want to provide for a growing population, we need to have economic growth. And I'm not saying growth as it has been or growth for growth's sake. I'm saying growth to match the requirements for quality of life and quality of living for an ever-increasing planet. But I do respect where you're coming from, and I understand. Yes?
I'd like to offer another challenge. The myth that people who live in third world countries have no appreciation of the ecology, the fact that they're all worried so much about their daily survival that they have no appreciation for the forest that's being cut down on the other side of the hill. I was down in Nicaragua in the 90s rather, and Puerto Cabello, which generally the standard of living is much, much lower than what we consider poor here. And yet they were all concerned about the forest that the U.S. had been cutting down, which had been stopped, fortunately, because of a revolution and a couple earthquakes. So that's a myth that we have about the poor, that they aren't thinking, they aren't intellectually engaged, that they are not part of the solution, are concerned and want to be part of the solution. They very much there wanted to be and were part of the solution.
No, and I humbly agree. The point in that is that when poverty and the extremes of human survival are dominating, other concerns are put aside. And there are environments where those particular challenges do dominate day-to-day survival, whereas, and you see that tremendously in areas that have been deforested by wood gathering because there is no other fuel for cooking food. And so these are, it's a level of complexity that we need to enhance our understanding. When the developed world and the developing world come into contact, there is a reason for, there is opportunity for great conflict, actually, and a tremendous amount of conflict. And I share your concerns in that regard.
It's not universal, though.
Yeah. One more. Thanks.
And this links to the decision about economic growth or sustainable growth. What's your perception around sustainability if we don't deal with the issue of population? And is there a holding capacity of the organic system, the planet Earth, that we have to recognize, or as a species we're doomed in a sense, or we won't be able to be sustainable?
Folks wiser than myself have calculated the maximum carrying capacity of the planet is 40 billion people, with a footprint that is more, quite a bit smaller. Our footprint is now about 5 acres in the developing world, about 25 acres in our universe, in the developed world. And so if we are more like the footprint of a developing world, we've got great capacity for population growth, but we don't have that capacity for a fully industrialized planet. The problem is we are like two sides of a funnel, right? We've got population growth, we've got environmental degradation, and they're coming together very rapidly. And that gives us cause for concern. And the degradation that we see and that we witness, especially in urban areas, especially with rural to urban migration, putting stress and very rapid stress on the cities. The future population growth of the planet is going to happen in cities. And there is a huge movement afoot in urban areas. Here's a message of hope for you. In the year 2000, the UN Millennium Development Goals, one of the goals was a substantial reduction in slums and slum dwellers. That was a 15-year goal. It was a huge, ambitious goal.
Thank you so much, Greg. That was wonderful and inspiring and really helpful. And do take advantage of him while he's here today to chat.